world.
I generally think that this sort of planning about cultural heritage protection will have to be part of any sort of military planning in the future.
Protecting items of cultural heritage during times of military conflict. And world migration trends take a turn to the south.
Even in Asia Pacific, you have a lot of countries that are starting to have very robust economies.
Hello and welcome to The World. I'm Tim Stackpool. Thanks for joining us. We'll also look at some new satellite mapping technology accurately recording the demise of the world's forests. But first, former President Laurent Gbagbo of Côte d'Ivoire was taken into custody by the International Criminal Court in The Hague on Wednesday to face charges of murder and rape. Mr. Gbagbo will stand trial for crimes committed during the violence that followed the presidential elections last year. The ICC says the former Ivorian leader bears individual responsibility as an indirect co-perpetrator for crimes against humanity committed by his supporters. ICC spokesman Fadi El Abdallah is discussing the detention and trial with Derek Mabarthur.
Mr. Gbagbo has indeed arrived in the detention center of the ICC, that cooperation with the authorities of Côte d'Ivoire and also in cooperation with the authorities of the host state of the ICC, the Netherlands. And this arrest and surrender was done in accordance with a warrant of arrest issued by pretrial chamber of the International Criminal Court.
Now, what is Mr. Gbagbo being charged with?
The judges of pretrial chamber 3 found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Gbagbo is criminally responsible for 4 counts of crimes against humanity: murder, rape and other sexual violences, persecution, and finally other inhuman acts allegedly committed in Côte d'Ivoire between December of 2010 and April 2011.
Now, when is he expected to appear before the court to enter his plea?
Well, in a few days, there will be the initial appearance hearing, so he will appear for the first time before the ICC judges, and the judges will ensure that he has been informed of his rights before the ICC and also that he has been informed of the charges brought against him. Then the judges will set the date for the hearing on the confirmation of charges. That's another step in the pre-trial proceedings, so we are not in a trial at this moment. It will be a pre-trial proceedings to determine whether or not there is enough evidence to transfer the case to the trial chamber or not. So it's only after the hearing on the confirmation of charges that the judges will decide whether or not there will be a trial.
How long does this process take normally?
It takes several months.
Now, is the ICC going to issue other warrants of arrest related to the post-election violence in Côte d'Ivoire?
The ICC prosecutor has made a clear statement today saying that the investigations in Côte d'Ivoire continue, and based on the evidence that will be collected and is being collected, the ICC prosecutor will submit other requests to the judges for the issuance of warrant of arrest or summonses to appear, and it will be for the ICC judges to decide on this request. But what the prosecutor has highlighted is that in his investigations he is totally impartial and that he will submit the request against the persons that he believes to be the highest responsible of the alleged crimes, and that's without considering to which political camp these persons belong. And in this line, we need to highlight that the chamber has authorized the prosecutor to open an investigation in Côte d'Ivoire with regard to allegations of crimes against humanity and also war crimes allegedly committed by both sides. And the prosecutor is investigating all these allegations.
Now, if I may, what lesson should other leaders in Africa and other regions of the world learn from former President Gbagbo's case?
Well, first let me be clear that Mr. Gbagbo is presumed innocent. And he will remain innocent unless the case is committed to a trial and the judges of a trial chamber decide that there is no reasonable doubt about his guilt. But the main lesson that we can all learn, I think, is that in according to the Rome Statute, there is no immunity for anyone for these mass crimes that are very serious and of concern to the international community as a whole. So even for sitting head of states or former head of states or other persons, the official title does not give immunity to anyone, and everyone who is suspected and might have a case to present before the judges will have to face them and will have to respect the procedure that guarantee that a fair proceedings will be conducted under the control of neutral and impartial and independent judges.
Fadi El Abdallah there discussing the fate of Côte d'Ivoire's former president, Laurent Gbagbo. The world lost nearly 10 hectares of forest every minute between 1990 and 2005. That's according to a new satellite-based survey released by the Food and Agriculture Organization. The new satellite technology gives a more consistent global picture over time of the world's forests. Jerry Adams asked the FAO's Eduardo Rojas about the key findings of the report.
The first finding is that in this period, 1990 to 2005, we are now working for the 2010 data and hope to have them in a year's time. Deforestation is 32% less than expected. It's estimated until today that period brought a deforestation of 7.1 million hectares per year. And in reality, deforestation has been of a little bit less than 5 million hectares per year. So we didn't lose more than 2 million hectares per year as estimated. This is a positive news. Of course, we are not as worse as we had estimated. Nevertheless, there is a lack of 300 million hectares that don't appear here that we had from other records. And this technology has a certain limitation with dryland forests, especially open forests like the Sahel, the Savannah, and the Australian forest. So we have to develop technologies to find these forests. This reduction against the estimates is strongly concentrated in Africa, where the deforestation figures have been reduced by 50%. It's a positive sign, as Africa is a continent that is more lagging behind in institutional, economic, and social development. And the explanation of that is that the figures that the African countries have provided were old and just prorogated by some linear correlations, but were not based on real information. And most likely there the deforestation is driven by small-scale shifting cultivation, and there the forest is able to recover after the abandonment of that agriculture. This survey has confirmed both the positive news of Asia that in the last 20 years is recovering really in a very fast path the forest, led by China but many other countries in the region, and as well confirmed the bad figures of Latin America that is still losing forest in a quite fast path of 4 million hectares per year without really significant reason that it is not very populated country. There are sufficient agricultural land, and nevertheless the deforestation figures are disappointing. And we have found unexpectedly 70 million hectares forest more, most likely in Russia, where Russia didn't report in the last 40 years.
What does this loss of forests mean to those who depend on the forests? How do they cope?
It depends where it happens. If it happens in the slopes of the Andes to Amazon, putting an example, this, of course, is erosion, is loss of soil, or in other mountainous areas. And the consequences are in the lower parts of the watershed, is risk of flood and even loss of lives, loss of good quality water, and so on. If we are in hotspot of biodiversity, we are losing species, we are losing habitats. If we are losing huge areas, especially dense forests, like tropical wet forest and rainforest, then we will lose as well high carbon storages. And if there is population around, especially poor and forest-dependent population, like in many African areas, then we lose as well livelihoods.
And how do you plan to use this data?
Well, one of the missions of FAO is to provide sound data on the situation of the forest in the world. And of course, these data are used very strongly in connection to the climate change debate. We are in the middle of the COP in Durban to calculate what are really the stocks as forests are, together with emissions and the sea, the main elements in the balance of carbon in the atmosphere, and carbon is the main greenhouse gases. So how forests are evolved is very important. We would like, in a certain way, to highlight that regions like Asia and previous times Europe are showing that it's possible to turn deforestation and forest area recovery, and this has major implications for biodiversity, for soil protection, for carbon storage.
Representatives from nearly 200 countries are gathered in the South African city of Durban for climate change negotiations organised by the UN. The debate will also focus on the soon-to-expire Kyoto Protocol, in which wealthy nations have signed to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 2012. The two-week conference will try to give a new impetus to climate talks which seem to have stalled. Jocelyn Sambira reports.
As if on cue, a violent storm has hit the city of Durban in South Africa, just as delegates were arriving for the opening of a climate debate. 8 people have reportedly died, and several districts of Durban have sustained extensive damage. Most of Africa has been suffering from extreme weather conditions, ranging from severe flooding to drought. For Cristina Figueiras, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it's proof that global warming is getting out of hand.
What we witnessed last night was unseasonable weather for Durban. And it is the type of unseasonable weather we are seeing all over the world as greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere continue to rise.
The Durban climate talks are organized every year by the United Nations to discuss strategies on how to deal with climate change. On top of the agenda this year is the renewal of the Kyoto Protocol that sets binding targets on greenhouse gas emissions, such as carbon dioxide. It's set to expire in 2012. Among the 192 countries that signed the protocol, only the developed countries are bound by it to reduce emissions, a main point of contention. South African Minister Maite Nkwane Mashabane summarizes what is at stake.
Developing countries want to be reassured that developed countries will honor their emissions reductions obligations as well as to provide the necessary means of implementation that would assist them to do their part. Developed countries, on the other hand, want to be reassured that all of them would take up their fair share of actions and not walk away from commitments, while they also wish to be assured that bigger developing countries who are also major emitters would indeed also take up the responsibility to reduce emissions for the greater good of all.
The UN is hoping that a decisive step will be taken in Durban to slash greenhouse gas emissions. However, some of the heavy polluters do not seem to be on board. Canada has already announced its withdrawal from the Kyoto Protocol effective next year. Meanwhile, the United States, which is not a signatory to the Kyoto Pact, has only agreed to voluntary cuts. Dr. John Pershing is the U.S. Deputy Special Envoy for Climate Change.
The United States, as you all know, is not a party to the Kyoto Protocol, so we will not weigh in on the Kyoto debate. But we should be clear, irrespective of Kyoto's disposition, the world is acting. Between now and 2020, the United States and all developed countries, as well as all major emerging economies and many others, will be implementing the commitments they made under the Cancun Agreement. These commitments and actions cover countries representing more than 80% of global greenhouse gases.
Unless big emitters from emerging economies like China also agree to cut emissions, the U.S. has refused to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. Meanwhile, the conference will also look at ways to raise money for the $100 billion a year Green Climate Fund that would allow poor nations to shoulder their share in reducing carbon emissions.
Jocelyn Sambira with that report. International migration is normally associated with people moving from developing countries to developed countries in search of jobs and better opportunities. But a phenomenon that is increasing is the migration from developing countries to other developing countries, or what is called South-South migration. A seminar on South-South migration took place in New York on Tuesday, where Derek Mabatha caught up with Yvonne Ladico to discuss South-South migration.
Normally, I think the paradigm is all people from developing countries are moving north. But with globalization and changes in the world economy and with the development of new states, the movement of people is more and more south-south. And I think a few advantages to that, and a lot of the people coming from the South may be from the same region, may have more similarities culturally with some of the countries that they're moving toward, and they are also help rebuilding and supporting other countries in the South.
So you are saying that actually people are moving from developing to developing countries. What is pushing them?
Well, I think there are opportunities. A lot of developing countries are no longer so-called developing. They might be considered middle level. And countries like Brazil, Mexico, even in Asia Pacific, you have a lot of countries that are starting to have very robust economies. And they have something to offer for people coming from other countries. And another cause for South-South migration is not just economic. Some of it is forced because of environmental degradation in their own countries. Maybe the rainfall may be less, or there could have been natural disasters. There are other reasons for the South-South, but let's say primarily it could be for economic opportunity. I myself worked with the UN in a country which is in post-conflict recovery, and it was involved in nation building, state building, and they had a lot of migrants from other developing countries. They were also looking for economic opportunity, they're also getting involved in the nation building.
What country was that?
East Timor, Timor-Leste. There are migrants, let's say, from the Philippines, and they are very involved in help building schools, building roads, working as domestic workers, but even helping out in the government. So they have a lot to offer.
Do we have estimates of the numbers of people who are moving from developing to developing countries?
Maybe it's almost 50% of the level of migration is going south-south rather than just south-north. About 110 million people. We learned that the second largest source of revenue for certain countries, such as the Philippines, was remittances from people from the Philippines who have migrated. And most of the migration has been to south-south. They are help building the Middle East countries, in Africa, and almost all countries. And those remittances go back to the Philippines. And so it is actually the second largest source of revenue for the Philippines.
Now, what are some of the challenges given the fact that in these developing countries to which people from other developing countries are migrating, there may be some challenges that the people there face?
Well, I think some of the challenges are that they are going to countries which are also vulnerable. So if there are some sudden economic shocks, for example, then that might affect the migration and the migrants who have gone there. They may be the first to lose their jobs. Because if there's a downturn in the north, then and if the south is a country that exports a lot of raw materials, for example, then their economy could soften and there'd be less need for the migrant support. And also, I think there may be in the South some infrastructure problems. And again, the vulnerabilities in some developing countries, they don't have the disaster reduction plans, rescue planning. And if there is some kind of environmental problem, what will happen to the migrant person? Where will they be if this happens? Or if there's some sort of political instability, an outbreak, then what will happen to that migrant person? Where will they go? Because even the people in that country, the citizens of that country, may find themselves in an unpredictable situation.
Tell me, has the global economic and financial crisis had an impact on this south-south migration?
Well, one would think that, but there were some surprising results that the developing countries' economy, especially the more emerging developing countries, are actually a little bit more robust than we all maybe planned for. And so this was very good. And in fact, the remittances from south-south migration were actually up.
To conclude, just give me your prognosis of this phenomenon.
I think the prognosis is a positive one because it shows that the South can work together. They are getting more strength within their own regions or realms. And it's not just South-South. Usually they work within the region. So it actually helps to strengthen certain regional development. If you look at Latin America, stronger countries, they actually help bringing up a whole region. And they can also, because of the South-South, even though it's from one country to the next, those people also learn new skills in the country that they go to. And they will bring those skills back to their country.
64 years ago, when the United Nations declared the end of the British mandate in Palestine, it also voted for the formation of two states. Israel was born shortly after. However, Palestine has yet to become a sovereign state. To mark the day, hundreds of students from various schools recreated Pablo Picasso's famous Peace Dove image in Jericho, at the foot of the Mount of Temptation. I spoke to Chris Gunnis of the Refugee Works Agency about the importance of this symbolic gesture.
We've just had a major event involving an extraordinary American artist called John Quidgley, and with him we assembled 1,000 UNRWA school children at the lowest point of the earth, just outside Jericho in a valley, and he lined them up in a very large representation of Pablo Picasso's famous line drawing of the Dove of Peace. And we photographed them from above, the most extraordinary message being sent up from the lowest point on earth by 1,000 Palestinian children, basically saying to the people of the world, we're ready for peace, we want peace. And of course, this comes at a time when the peace process is in the doldrums, so it's a particularly poignant message on this International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people.
Chris, regarding the International Day of Solidarity of the Palestinian people, are the Palestinians feeling any support? Is anything changing?
Well, it's a very interesting question, that, because things are changing, but that change is not really involving the Palestinians. You've seen, for the last 9 months or more, extraordinary demonstrations sweeping across the Arab world, the so-called Arab Spring, which has slowly become the Arab Winter. If you're Palestinian, you must be thinking, hang on a second, how does this involve me? Because none of these extraordinary changes taking place have really made much difference. The one thing we have seen is movement towards Palestinian unity. Don't forget that in the Arab Spring protests in the OPT, what you saw was people in Gaza and in the West Bank coming out and saying to political leadership, we want to see the old political divisions healed. We want to see Fatah and Hamas forming a national unity government. So we're seeing pressure towards that. But given the sort of extraordinary levels of social change that we've seen in places like Egypt, I think a lot of Palestinians are wondering why the Arab Spring has left them out in the cold.
Talking about having a unified government, the head of the UN has said that statehood for the Palestinian people is long overdue. Is that the feeling?
In UNRWA, we're a refugee agency. We're working for the last 63 years with Palestine refugees, and they've been denied statehood for 63 long years. We advocate in UNRWA for a just and durable solution so that the refugees' plight can be resolved in the context of an overall political settlement. Our message is, can the peacemakers please get their act together? 63 years have gone by. These refugees that we serve, the Palestinian people, need their own state. They need it urgently, because once they've got this framework, once they've got the state, so much of all this other aid dependency, humanitarian work, all the work that UNRWA does can just melt away. And UNRWA wants nothing less than to see its own presence melt away. We crave nothing more than our own dissolution, but that must be within the context of a political resolution.
That's Chris Gunnis of the Refugee Works Agency talking about the continued effort by Palestinians to establish their own sovereign state. To Libya now, where there has been great concern over the status of items of both national and world cultural importance. The civil conflict in the country put many ancient heritage sites and collections under threat, but some internationally recognised groups are working to ensure the artefacts and ancient remnants are catalogued and accounted for. John Adams joined them.
Libya boasts a rich cultural heritage, from Paleolithic rock paintings through Greek and Roman ruins and ancient desert oases. These historic treasures, including 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, have suffered years of neglect and most recently undergone the perils of conflict. Karl von Habsburg, president of the Blue Shield Committee in Austria, and Dr. Joris Keeler, teacher at the University of Amsterdam and chairman of the International Military Cultural Resources Work Group, have a common goal in the protection of natural and cultural heritage. They realise the need to implement protection planning before a conflict unfolds, instead of after, when irreparable damage has already been done.
We both know the importance to be fast and in a place where there is a potential conflict or an actual conflict, and you have to be there really fast to make an assessment and to see what you can do in immediate help.
On a previous visit, they and other international specialists took it upon themselves to make a no-strike list of all the cultural heritage sites, an initiative that was the first of its kind. This, their second visit, has them travelling mainly in the east around Benghazi, assessing to what extent the conflict impacted on the cultural heritage of Libya. Special entry has been granted to sites that several months earlier had been welded shut for protection. Welding entrances shut is a practice which Karl and Joris advocate and teach in order to give the best protection to heritage in times of unrest. Although this may work for museums, protecting sites like Liptus Magna and Serene in wide open spaces is a lot more difficult.
Thieves will steal anything. Thieves take the opportunities provided during riots and chaos, which arise out of the revolution, and they break in to steal ruins, artifacts and anything else.
In perhaps the worst case of looting of the conflict, nearly 8,000 ancient gold, silver and bronze coins and a small number of artifacts were stolen from a Benghazi bank vault. Generally speaking, the scale of what has been stolen or looted is difficult to estimate, because in some areas extensive documentation, archiving and cataloguing was never carried out. Yet Libya seems to have avoided the kind of cultural looting and vandalism that occurred after the war in Iraq. Karl and Joris feel that they are providing a service that other heritage organisations do not currently fulfil.
Because it's dangerous, it costs money, we don't know, but we are filling the gap, and we hope that we will encourage them to take over part of our duties and do the work that has to be done. And one of the things is to liaison with the military, and that's why I'm the chair of this International Military Cultural Resources Working Group, because we can bridge the gap between NGOs or IOs civilian organizations and military organizations.
Their military backgrounds have helped them to understand how best to talk to the armed forces and ensure that the preservation of cultural heritage is factored into the planning of military operations.
I generally think that this sort of planning about cultural heritage protection will have to be part of any sort of military planning in the future, just by the nature of the conflicts that we are facing. And of course, in a conflict of ethnicities, the identity of the opponent is the most important target, and therefore, of course, the cultural heritage of the opponent is the most important target. And with this targeting of cultural heritage, it is important to implement it into the planning. And that's what we are trying to preach, to teach where we can, but also to live and act on it.
Cooperation between NATO and other key actors like UNESCO will be key to ensure the protection of cultural and historical property in times of unrest, fulfilling international legal obligations.
John Adams reporting from Libya on the work being done to ensure heritage items of world importance are safeguarded during times of armed conflict. And that is The World for this week. If you want to learn more about the program or wish to make a contribution to the show, then please visit us at www.theworldradioshow.com. The World is committed to bringing you stories that affect the people of our planet, either on a mass or individual scale, and we hope to do so with balance and integrity. We always welcome your comments and your suggestions, so please do keep in touch at www.theworldradioshow.com. The program is produced and compiled by Tim Stackpool, and I look forward to your company next time. Until then, bye for now.